Good to see everyone here. Brett Guthrie, when are you up for re-election again? November. All right, I've got to remember that, and I've got to rethink some things because you see, y'all remember me mouthing off about whenever you see me with one of these little microphones like that? I had to wear one for his daughter's wedding. So I'm still feeling kind of hard about that. Anyway, I would like to also, one additional announcement, I'd like to ask everyone to keep Carter's wife Chelsea and her family in your prayers. Her grandmother Virginia Cooper passed away last night. So if you keep them in prayers, that would be greatly appreciated. If you feel uncomfortable that my coat is not on, it's occupying the front pew. You can count it as an extra person. You know, there have been some bad decisions in life over the centuries. You know, at one time, farmers used to wear a piece of cloth around their neck so they could wipe their face. And I guess one Sunday, one of them's wife said, "You know, that looked nice on you yesterday. Why don't you wear it today to church?" And he did, and the other wives noticed that it looked nice, and so they all went home and they washed up the prettiest piece of cloth they could have, and they made their husbands wear it to church the next Sunday, and then they worked on it a little bit more, and they ended up with this thing called a tie, and that was a bad decision all the way around. And then you've kind of got to wonder where the decision came that you're supposed to wear a suit coat to church. I mean, I don't understand that. The only people in this building that are cold are women, and so I don't know why y'all wouldn't have to wear a suit coat. I just kind of wonder where that decision came from. Now, people say wear your Sunday best and all that. I don't know how that involves a coat necessarily, but that's also kind of a bad policy because that turns church into a fashion show for the rich and kind of an embarrassing thing for the poor. So I think you ought to dress decent and sensible, and somehow or another a suit coat and a tie came into the equation. I'm just not sure on that, but somebody made a decision. There's several things going through my mind right now that I could talk about. For one, I try very hard to be a patient person and fail miserably most of the time. And one of those times is when, you know, I've already told you this, when people are checking out. It drives me crazy when people are in the checkout line and they swipe their card and they ask a person credit or debit. And they have to think that over. And I want to say cash, pay cash and get out of line. Because it takes them a while. It's like, why didn't they think of that before they ever got up there? And then I'm not even going to bring up how infuriating it is when women want to give them the exact change and they've got a purse about this big and everything's in it and the coins are mixed up. Hey, just save up your coins and turn them into the bank and let them count them. I mean, that will save us all a lot of time. I get a little frustrated sometimes when I pull into McDonald's. I worked at McDonald's I don't know, in 1981. And as far as I know, there's only been a few minor changes to the menu. And yet you go in line and people stand there and stare at the menu. How do you not have that figured out before you get there? I mean, the only surprise that might be there is the McRib, and they've announced that for 3 months that it's back. And yet people get there and they stand and apparently it's very hard to make a decision on a Big Mac or Quarter Pounder or the dollar menu, and they stand and oh, mercy. And my wife is this lovely, intelligent lady, but you lay a menu in front of her at a restaurant, and they won't. It's just bad form for me to go ahead and eat without her and leave while she's sitting there trying to decide, and so they never take my order while she sits there and studies. I don't know, it's a brain freeze or something, making a decision. I wish she would just let me order for her. And everybody here understands this, right? Every man here understands this. Where do you want to eat tonight? I don't care. But everyone you name is wrong. So apparently you do care. And y'all know this. I didn't come up with this. And I don't know why Patrick didn't seize on this. You ought to name a restaurant. I don't care. That way when the wife says, I don't care, you pull in there. You know where you're going. But decision making is a hard thing. And there are some serious decisions that we make in life, right? And I just wish that kids, and that's part of the growing up process, but I just wish kids were not allowed to make decisions till they're about 25. Maybe 30. I'm not sure if I want to bump it up that far or not, but I guess that's part of growing up. But how many of us really made poor choices when we were 15 and 16 or 17 or 13? And you live with them, those bad choices. Now, most time you get on past it in some way, but it's still something that you'd like to go back and really change if you could. We all understand the importance of making good decisions because they have a lifetime impact. And it's hard at times to make a good decision, especially when there's a whole lot weighing in the balances and there's all sorts of consequences. And sometimes those consequences are eternal ones. But indecision is also costly. You got to make decisions. Churches sometimes suffer with indecision. I've been preaching now for a long, long time, and there have been instances in my ministry in which I know that churches ended up hurting themselves by indecision. Maybe they didn't want to deal with a troublesome church member that just kept things stirred up or kept causing problems. And we're so afraid that we're going to hurt somebody's feelings, and so we spare one to the hurt of many. And churches sometimes are paralyzed by this indecision. And there's also times where we make mistakes in not going ahead and making a decision when opportunities are laid there before us, and we just kind of hesitate. We're indecisive, and it leads to missing out on grand opportunities. Businesses, that's to run a business, indecision can ruin it, or bad decisions can ruin it. There's a lot of companies that have probably been hurt in the long run because they had unproductive employees and they just didn't want to deal with it, and so that kind of spread throughout the company, and they ended up ruining their company. People oftentimes don't reach up to their potential because they refuse to make a decision. It is a truth. Now, it's sometimes debatable and it's sometimes not obvious. It is a truth that some people end up being bad citizens because they just are afraid to make the decision to do brave things, to do the right thing. They had rather just pretend they don't care as to make the decision and try hard. So a lot of times people are held back from their potential because of indecision, or they make the wrong decision. Procrastination is another one, isn't it, in this decision-making process. I've got in trouble a couple of times over this procrastination. I like to think about things a little bit. The problem is I guess I'm ADD and I can't focus on one thing. But, you know, there's times where we have been looking for a house and I find this great bargain on a house, but I got to think about it a little bit, and then I call back to check on it and it's already sold. And that just gets me in trouble. And I can think of 2 or 3 instances where I could have got this dream house for a great price, but I procrastinated. People oftentimes procrastinate when it comes to doing the right thing. They're going to get around to it. They're going to do it. I mean, how many of us have known people that were sick, that we needed to visit, we meant to visit, and they ended up passing away before we did it? And that should leave us with a bad feeling. I certainly have experienced that more than I care to admit. And we salve our conscience by talking about how we had so much to do, we had so many things going on, but we know better. We generally do what we want to do. We procrastinate and we miss out on opportunities to spend time with family, to spend time with people that we love, and then we no longer have that opportunity. Procrastination is a powerful thing in that it affects things throughout all eternity. Somebody said, tomorrow is the day when idlers work and fools reform, and the lost lay hold on eternal life. They're going to do it tomorrow, but tomorrow never comes. I don't know who said it, but it's a favorite saying of mine, not because it is a positive statement. It's actually not. But on the plains of hesitation lies the bleached bones of countless millions who at the very thought of victory or at the very dawn of victory sat down to rest and resting died. They're right there at it, but they procrastinate. Procrastination has caused a lot of people to go into eternity not prepared to meet God. Now, Jesus wants us to weigh our decisions, to make good decisions, obviously. And he challenged His disciples in Luke chapter 14. And you can turn there if you want to, but I'm going to run on over to Acts 24 pretty quick. In Luke chapter 14, verse 27, Jesus says, and there's an important saying before that, 25 and 26, but for the sake of time, I'm going with verse 27. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not sit down and count the cost whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him. In other words, here's a person that had a good idea, had big dreams. Problem is, they didn't sit down and think it through, and they didn't have the money to finish it. Now, you would think somebody starting out on a big project like that would have thought it through. And that's a sad thing. I don't know why. It's just one of those things that's etched in my memory. It's not even that big of a deal, but I don't know, maybe it's one of those moments in life where when I was a kid, I remembered this verse and I saw something that really brought it to life, and that was it looked to be just a shop, and they poured a concrete floor, and it was a pretty big shop, and they started on it, and they get 1.5 wall up. And it stayed that way for years. And every time I drive by that, I think, I'd like to know the story. What's going on? Is this one of those people that Jesus was talking about they didn't count the cost. They just didn't. You know, what was the story there? I knew of a family up in East Tennessee. They could have been some of the wealthiest people in East Tennessee if they were just business-minded. They owned a junkyard, and I've never seen as many muscle cars in all of my life. I mean, it was just absolutely incredible. In fact, I went with them one day they had them parked up on a mountainside. And I mean, every kind of muscle car that you could imagine stretched out through the woods. And there's trees growing up through them, and there's all sorts of stuff. But then I looked, and behold, there's a 2-story house there. A 2-story house that is framed up, and it's got that black stuff on the side, and it's got the roof on it, and it's not finished. And there's stuff literally growing out the window in it. And I'm like, what in the world are they thinking to get this far on a house and stop? Why did they not see it through? Well, Jesus goes on, talks about a king going off to make war, and he gets message back from his soldiers, from his spies that hey, our enemy's got 20,000 and we've only got 10,000. And so he says, which king is not going to figure these things out and sit down and work things out rather than fight and lose? Jesus wants us to count the cost and make sure that we're in when we decide to follow Him. He wants everybody to follow Him. But Jesus also said that He'd rather have you hot or cold rather than lukewarm. He doesn't want you to jump in and then just kind of coast. He wants you to be fired up. Now in Acts 24, you've got a guy by the name of Felix, and there's always a lot of background to be given, and I'm going to run through this rather quickly. You read chapter 23, chapter 24. Paul has been arrested. He's on trial. The guy that tries him knows he's innocent, and he even protects the Apostle Paul with 270 soldiers. I think it is. 270 soldiers. Actually 470, because he has 270 cavalry and 200 just soldiers to escort Paul. Now that guy's protecting him, isn't he? I mean, that's serious protection. And they take him to another place, and he's going to be tried by a guy by the name of Felix. And so Felix is going to hear this trial, and in Acts 24 what you've got is you've got the Jews presenting their case against Paul, and then you've got Paul defending himself and talking about, here's why I'm on trial. I'm not guilty of the charges they brought against me. And what the real issue is I'm preaching the resurrection of the dead. Now in Acts 24 and verse 22, Felix, having a rather accurate knowledge of the way, one of the names of the church is the way. I love that. But Felix, having a rather accurate knowledge of the way, put them off, saying, when Lysias the tribune comes down, I will decide your case. Now he knows about this. He doesn't need any more information, but he's postponing it. Then he gave orders to the centurion that he should keep in custody, that he should be kept in custody, but have some liberty, that none of his friends should be prevented from attending to his needs. And after some day, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, and he sent for Paul, and he heard him speak about faith in Christ Jesus. I would love to have had this sermon, the record of this sermon. Now, as he reasoned about righteousness, now listen to what his 3 points. Righteousness, self-control, and coming judgment. Now that's a powerful little sermon, and you admire the Apostle Paul even more when you know that Felix is on his 3rd wife, and his 3rd wife, Drusilla, the Jewish person, the Jewish lady, he took away from somebody else. So Paul doesn't blink an eye. He's like John the Baptist here. He says, let me tell you how you ought to live. You ought to live godly. You ought to live holy. You ought to conduct yourself. And you ought to exercise some self-control, because there's judgment day coming. And when Felix hears that, he was alarmed. He was afraid. He knew he was in the wrong. But watch what he does. He says, go away for the present. When I get an opportunity, I will summon you. Now, folks, he had the offer of eternal life laid there before him. They was going to demand some changes. It was going to demand that he become a servant of Jesus Christ. It was going to demand that he repented of his sins. It was going to demand that he would be baptized just like all these other people had been baptized. He knew what he needed to do. He knew what he needed to do, but he put it off. And it kept him in prison for 2 years, and he talked with him often, but really all he's hoping for is money, so he's got rotten motives here. But 2 years he's had the opportunity with the Apostle Paul right there to teach him anything that he needs to know, to answer any question he might have, and he put it off. I don't know why. I don't know every reason why Felix didn't obey the gospel. Don't you love people that have made good decisions in life, and especially those in the Bible? Don't you love the statement when Joshua says to the people, choose this day whom you will serve, but as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. That's powerful. You do what you got to do, but here's what me and my family are going to do. I love the challenge of Elijah on Mount Carmel when he is in competition or competing with the prophets of Baal, and there's this whole host of Baal prophets over there, and there's one lone man standing up for God. And Elijah stands up, and there's the nation of Israel gathered around these altars, and he says, how long are you going to stagger between two opinions? If God is God, serve Him. If Baal is God, then serve Him. But make up your mind. I like what Paul says, this one thing I do. He made a choice that he was going to be Christ-focused, that he was going to live to please Jesus even if it didn't please anybody else. You know, the college I went to, International Bible College, now Heritage Christian, we used to go on a door-knocking campaign every semester. Every semester we'd go out and we'd knock doors all week long. We would set up studies. We would we would study with people. And I'll be honest with you, I've always felt inferior in doing that. Because I'm not a hard salesman. I'm just not. Some people see me as intense. Well, I am, I guess, on some things. But I'm not going to push somebody to follow Jesus. I think it has to be their decision. I don't need to force them into it. And we'd go on these campaigns, and man, there'd be some guys that would set up studies all week long, and they'd baptize people right and left, and here I'm doing the same work and praying just as hard as they are and working just as hard as they are and trying to be as friendly as they are. And I'm studying with people, but I usually left the decision with them. I didn't talk them into the baptistry. And I've often wondered if I didn't do wrong in doing that, but here's what I learned after the fact. Most of those people that were baptized on the spur of the moment never went to church after that. So they got caught up in the moment. And they were baptized. And that was great. But it doesn't mean a lot if you don't follow Jesus the rest of your life. I don't like to put a lot of pressure on people. I really don't. Lynn would argue with you on that, but she can resist better than anybody I know too. I remember when I was 14 years old, I loved the Lord, I loved church. I could go back over this with some of you have heard it. I loved the Lord, I loved the church. Church was a safe place. I loved it. It was a place where people acted right. Not always, but more than any other place. And we had a gospel meeting, and this preacher was a very powerful preacher, and I loved what he was having to say, and I listened to it, and I was a pretty good student of the Word at that time, and he came to me as I was going out the door. He kind of caught me, and I didn't know the guy, but he kind of pulled me to the side, and he said, "Have you been baptized?" And I remember feeling so embarrassed. I guess that's one reason I'm hesitant about singling people out and pressuring them. But I was so embarrassed, and he said, "I want you to think about it this week." And I did think about it, but I was so fearful. I don't know why. But you know, if I could go back and do one thing over that would make my life, there's those wasted years in my life from about 15 till 20 years old that if I could go back and do one thing, I would have become a Christian that week. Because the mistakes I made was because I pulled away from church, I pulled away from godliness, I pulled away, and that's where I made my biggest mistakes in that time period. And why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you all this because you see, there are young people here that are just like me in that time frame. You love the Lord, you love the church, you love the youth group, you love singing, you love praising God, you love the Bible classes. But for whatever reason, you haven't been baptized. And I got to ask you the question, why are you having so much trouble with this decision? This is the greatest decision you will ever make. And so why are you waiting? Make the decision, arise and be baptized, and wash away your sins, calling on the name of the Lord. It is a big decision, but some of you have thought about it and thought about it and thought about it and have not acted on it. It's time to act on it. Now is the acceptable time. Or it may be that some of you have been coming to church here and you love it here, you haven't placed membership, and you're kind of thinking about, going here, or you're thinking about becoming more involved. Well, quit waiting on making a decision. Why don't you make that decision? Why don't you become a committed member of this church? Why don't you get involved now? Don't just keep putting off. Why don't you get involved and use your great talents for the glory of God? Why don't you identify with this group of people as being the saints of God that are trying very hard? We're filled with faults and foolishness, but we are still the saints of God. This is the family of God. Make the decision to be a part of it, and a productive part of it. Or maybe there are people here today that have been thinking about, everybody knows that I've sinned. I've just messed up in my life. I've wandered away. I've not been a good example. And I just really ought to go forward and ask for the prayers of the church and be prayed over by one of our fine elders here. And I've just been thinking about it. Well, why wait? Decide today to do the right thing. Don't procrastinate. Don't be filled with fear. Be bold and make the right decision. You're invited to come as we stand and sing together.